I'm Ann Ziebarth. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I just want to say that I'm a sociologist by trade. It's kind of odd. I'm in the College of Design, but I'm a sociologist. And I've spent my career studying rural places, small towns, and in particular, I look at housing as an indicator of those demographic changes that Ryan was talking about, economic changes, and social and political changes as well. And so I think I'm here to talk to you a little bit about housing as a particular issue that communities are facing, and especially workforce housing. So what is workforce housing? Let's begin with that. Workforce housing basically is often housing for workers, right? Workers and their families. So it could be anybody who is employed or wants to be employed and where they live. So we're talking about predominantly in terms of communities struggle with workforce housing. It's housing that is affordable, available for new employees. Often it's starting wages. And so oftentimes the sort of metric that communities use is families with incomes between 60 and 120% of the area's median income. How do you know if you have that kind of housing? Well, everybody do this. We're going to talk about 5 A's for housing. First, you have to have housing stock that's available, right? It has to be there. You have to have ownership and rental opportunities that are available when people want to move into your town. Secondly, it has to be adequate. Those buildings, those structures have to be in good shape. The mechanical systems have to work. You know, the basic structural aspects of housing as a building. Third, it has to be affordable. The cost of that housing has to match the incomes of the workers that are in your particular community. It has to be appropriate. It has to meet the needs of the workers and their families in that place, okay? So that means that it has to be the right size for the kinds of people who are coming to your community. So if you're attracting new immigrants, if those immigrants tend to have larger family sizes, and you have 1 and 2 bedroom kind of housing available, it may not be appropriate for the families that you want. And finally, that housing, number 5, needs to have certain accessible amenities, jobs, schools, healthcare, all those things that communities offer. Why care about workforce housing? Well, housing is an asset, both for the families and for the communities. And as an asset, it creates the everyday lives, health, and well-being of the people who live in it. And it's a key for attracting and retaining workers. People won't stay if they have to commute too far. There's no place for them to live. It's a problem. Talk to the folks in Roseau. They'll tell you how difficult it is to recruit qualified workers in a community that doesn't have enough housing. It also affects the multiplier effect of economic development activities. Communities invest in economic development. They assume that they will not only get the return in terms of jobs, but also those other things, those other benefits to the community, that it will affect their main street businesses, that the schools will have more students, that these jobs will also contribute to the development of the community as a whole. And that's the multiplier effect. Is anyone here from Olivia, Minnesota? They had an economic development director who figured out at one point, a number of years ago, that attracting jobs wasn't enough. They had a new plant opening up. They had new people moving, or anticipating new people moving into town. They didn't have housing available for those newcomers. They had senior housing. They had, a few rundown trailer homes, but that wasn't going to attract people to their community. And they figured out those folks were going to move someplace else if they didn't provide housing. Now, in the end, they did. They were able to develop some nice middle-class sort of rental housing. It gave people a place to move into town, and then hopefully those people would buy homes and settle and stay as well, freeing up that rental housing for more newcomers to come into the town. It wasn't a smooth trip, and if anybody wants to talk to me about how that happened, I'd be happy to talk about it. It took them a long time, and that's one of the problems. Affordability is key, and it's only the income or the wages or the cost of the housing have to be balanced. And so we're always looking at that sort of match between housing cost and balance. Here in Minnesota, the National Low Income Housing Coalition publishes information about rental costs and the housing wage, what it costs, how much you need to earn to afford a 2-bedroom home in Minnesota statewide is about $18.60 an hour, or a monthly wage of $611. There's no place in the state where anyone with a minimum wage can afford to live in a decent 2-bedroom home. And we also have to be careful about affordability in terms of rules of thumb. We use a magic number. We use a 30% of household income for housing cost, and if people are paying more than that, it's considered housing cost burdened. That 30%, however, can be misleading. If it's on the very low end of the income, 30% may not leave you enough to pay for the rest of your housing expenses, healthcare, food, insurance, everything else, transportation, everything else you need. Also, high wages don't necessarily mean that you have affordable, available housing. Think North Dakota oil boom. They have very high, and so one of the big barriers is the lag in time in housing that occurs between what it takes to develop housing and when the jobs arrive. So there's always a lag in that, and that's one of the challenges that communities have, to anticipate the future. Housing is not fixed, it's grounded in place, and that's key. Community leaders and community community ordinances, laws, land use planning, land use regulation all impact housing. Two of our community extension educators, and probably more, are working on a project to compile case studies of local solutions to housing problems. And Ryan, can you wave? Ryan and Merritt are taking some leadership on this, and they've done a number of examples of case studies here in Minnesota. Claremont, Minnesota is a town of about 550 population, and it's a problem, but it's using a team approach to solve the problem. My time's up here, and I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. One is workforce housing is embedded in the community. For most people, as Ryan was talking about, we worry about policies based on our own perceptions, on our own experiences. Most people live somewhere, and the leadership in most communities are living comfortably, and so housing is not necessarily a salient issue. There's some very interesting work going on about public perception and public opinions and leadership responsibility with regard to addressing this housing problem. There are a number of solutions, and I can talk to you about that. I've got an ABC of them, and I'll quit here just so that you know there are resources out there, and finally, there's a solution at the end of the rainbow.